How's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to be talking about the infamous Fallout 4. Now, Fallout 4 is a very touchy and complicated game. You will have people on one spectrum saying this is the worst game to ever touch the Fallout franchise, and then other people on the other side of the spectrum that love this game and it's their complete favorite. Even when searching this game up on Google, you can't escape the divided player base. My honest take about this game is that it isn't the worst thing to ever touch the Fallout franchise, but it's definitely not the best. It has lots of flaws, and that's going to be what I'm talking about today. I want to talk about the bad, but also the good about Fallout 4, and why I think Fallout 4 is one of the best and simultaneously one of the worst RPGs ever made. I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but stick with me and I hope I'll be able to sort of convince you of this. The only warning I guess I have to give about this video is that it gets very nitpicky. But aside from that, I hope you gain some new insight, and I hope you have some insight you're willing to share too. So with all that said and done, if you do end up enjoying this video, I hope you leave a like, I hope you subscribe, but I hope you definitely say something down below and add something to the conversation. But with all that said and done, let's get into the video. Alright, so I'm going to start this video off with the bad aspects of Fallout 4, my critiques, so to speak, with it. Pretty much all of these critiques are just in almost random order, but this one I feel should definitely go first, and it's the intro of the game. Now, I absolutely hate the intro of Fallout 4. Yeah, when I said this got nitpicky, it definitely got nitpicky. The reason why I hate the intro is because it does absolutely nothing to introduce you to the game, what an intro should do. To show you what I'm talking about, let's look at Fallout New Vegas's intro. Fallout New Vegas's intro starts by panning outside of the Lucky 38 into Vegas. Once the camera's panned outside to the strip, we can see drunk NCR soldiers walking down the strip. This shot introduces us to the main setting of the game while also showing us a key faction of the game. It doesn't spoil anything, it just gives some exposition to factions and settings you'll see throughout the game. The camera pans even more outside of the strip to an NCR Ranger. The NCR Ranger sets up a sniper and then takes a shot at a fiend right outside of Camp McCarran, the NCR base of Fallout New Vegas. The camera pans out even more to some of Caesar's Legion looking down at Camp McCarran, and some of the soldiers run by. Finally, the camera pans out to Good Springs, where the courier lies next to Benny. This intro shows off various set pieces, locations, factions, and stays true to the game world. You can go to pretty much any place you see in the intro in the game. Afterwards, the game gives a basic lore dump of what's going on, basically who's the NCR, who's Caesar's Legion, and why is the world new. Just some very basic things so you're not going into this game completely confused. Not enough to spoil it, but just the right amount to make sure you sort of understand the world you're in. Finally, the intro ends with a scene kicking off the entire rest of the gang, where Benny shoots you in the head and leaves you in Good Springs. Now, I get it. Barely a minute into the video and I'm already mentioning New Vegas, but trust me, I really felt it was needed here, okay? This intro does exactly what it's meant to, introduce you to the game at hand. Now, let's look at Fallout 4's intro. It starts off with a clip of a soldier running through a World War II battlefield, and the protagonist, Nate, is talking about how his great-grandfather served in World War II. He then talks about how the atomic bombs dropped in Japan changed the world forever. He then goes on to say that nuclear energy is not used as a weapon, but instead as a power source, basically referring to how the Fallout world basically used nuclear energy for everything. He then goes to talk about how due to overconsumption, there becomes a lack of resources in the world, basically referring to the resource wars. He says the entire world unraveled and peace becomes a distant memory. Then he does this bit at the end where he says that he's afraid for himself, his wife, and his infant son. And then he says the line, "War never changes," that Bethesda just loves using. I absolutely hate this intro. It does nothing. Nothing to introduce you to the game at hand. The intro really only tells you two things that are even Fallout lore related whatsoever that could be remotely useful, and it's that the world resorted to nuclear energy and that the resource wars, yeah, they happened. Other than that, the intro does absolutely nothing to give you any knowledge about the game you're about to play. Other than that, it gives you a minor lore dump that isn't specific to Fallout 4 whatsoever. This could be applied to any Fallout game and it would stand true. I feel like a lot of this could be forgiven in the intro if it wasn't trying so hard to be dramatic. Like, why is the main character mentioning his great-great-great-grandfather from World War II? And then why does he just say war never changes at the end of it? Bethesda just likes to drop the line war never changes without giving any meaning to it whatsoever. Like, this guy was in the military, so war never changes, I guess, guys. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say it's some deep philosophical meaning to it. The main point is just that humans will always wage war no matter what. Even after the world has been devastated by nuclear bombs, humans will still find a way to kill each other. But Bethesda just likes to say it, just to say it, because it sounds kind of dramatic. You know, I feel like this intro might be good for, you know, a first-time player. You know, it might, you know, hype you up for the game because of how cinematic it is. But other than being, you know, really cinematic, it does absolutely nothing to introduce you to the game at hand. And just because I use New Vegas's intro as an example does not mean I think other 3D Fallouts don't have good intros. Fallout 3's intro does a great job introducing you to the setting and factions. Its intro is simple but effective. My opinion, Fallout 4's intro gets a 2 or 3 out of 10. My next critique with the game, and it should be really no surprise if you've seen any video critiquing this game, is the weapon design. Most of the weapons in this game are pretty abysmal to look at, which kind of sucks because the guns before this game, basically I'm referring to the previous Fallouts, all were really good. For example, in Fallout 3, the main gun pretty much every Raider, Super Mutant, and Brotherhood of Steel soldier carried was the assault rifle. And this gun was basically just a G3 with a wooden handguard in stock. But generally speaking, I'd say the gun was pretty good looking. And in Fallout New Vegas, you obviously had many guns like the service rifle, the various lever action rifles, and even like the anti-material rifle, and even the hunting rifle, which was in both games, Fallout 3 and New Vegas, were all really good and, in my opinion, well-designed guns. Fallout 3's assault rifle and Fallout New Vegas's service rifle were all really well-designed guns based off of real-life counterparts, I guess, but they had their own sort of artistic flair to them, which made them stand out, and they looked pretty good. I get there was other guns in these games, but these two in particular, I feel like really exemplify my point. Now let's take a look at Fallout 4's gun. Now, the most obvious offender is the assault rifle, and I'm sure you've heard many other people talk about this, but it is just an ugly looking gun, does not make sense whatsoever. It is a Frankenstein of a gun and just aesthetically does not fit the game whatsoever. And I remember playing this game for the first time as a kid and seeing the gun, and even then I didn't like it. I thought it was way too big in my hands. Now I will give this gun some credit. It does look a lot better when paired with power armor, which I think was its intended use. You can see in the Fallout TV show they have the assault rifle paired with the Brotherhood power armor, and in that case scenario I think it looks way better. But I mean, even in Fallout 4, the only people to ever wield this weapon are Raiders, Super Mutants, and Gunners, which pretty much all for the most part aren't wearing power armor. I don't think one Brotherhood soldier is using the assault rifle in Fallout 4, which in my opinion is a really big missed mark. The Brotherhood of Steel could have used these assault rifles and it would have paired really well with the power armor. Another gun in Fallout 4 that is a pretty big offender in my opinion is the combat rifle, and also the combat shotgun, since they're essentially the same gun. Other than its obvious flaws, like for example the magazine being a lot bigger than the actual round that is being chambered into the gun, or the bolt not being able to reciprocate enough to chamber another round. Besides those two aspects, I don't have too much of an issue with the combat rifle, other than the fact that it just looks really basic for a fictional gun. I mean, come on, you're creating a fictional gun and you make the most bland thing ever. It looks like you asked a 3-year-old to draw a gun. The combat shotgun in Fallout 4 basically looks like the combat rifle with some different barrel options and a different looking magazine. Other than that, it's practically the same gun. Fallout 3's combat shotgun looks like a mix between like a PPSH and a shotgun with like a modern barrel, which again, I think matches the retro futuristic aesthetic of the game. With Fallout 4's combat shotgun, the gun just looks super bland and like uninteresting, and it wasn't anything too crazy. I mean, Fallout 3's combat shotgun, the magazine was just moved up a bit on the gun, but it gave it a completely different look. But yeah, the Fallout 4 combat rifle and shotgun are just really uninteresting and generally boring weapons that just look very bland and, I mean, unoriginal in my opinion. Another gun that in my opinion is pretty much almost perfect, it literally just has one flaw, and honestly I don't even think it's that big of a flaw. I think it's still a good gun nonetheless, is the hunting rifle. I think it looks good, fits well in the game, and isn't outlandish in any ways. My only issue is that the bolt is on the left side of the gun instead of the right, and I get in this video it's on the right side of the gun, but that's because I'm using mods to replace it. I'm not too sure why they decided to do this, because they've gotten the bolts on the bolt action rifles correct in the other games, but it's not that big of an issue. It's just like a minor flaw with the gun. I still think the gun holds up perfectly fine even with the bolt on the left side of the gun. I just wanted to talk about that gun in particular before I mention all the good guns later on in the video, because that gun I don't think it's great, but I don't think it's bad either. I just think it's all right. It's an all right gun. Anyways, moving on to the last bad gun in Fallout, so to speak, is the pipe gun. I think the pipe weapons, they look okay, like from an outsider perspective if you don't think about them too much, but for homemade guns they just do not make sense whatsoever. For example, the magazine is on the side of the gun, but it's also below the bolt of the gun, which would make it nearly impossible to chamber a round into the gun. Again, I don't want to like overanalyze these guns, but I just want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. These are homemade guns to have an appearance of like a simple or crude design with seemingly overly complicated or just not functional designs whatsoever, which completely negates the point of a homemade gun in the first place. It needs to be simple so people can make it. But I do want to give kudos to the pipe revolver. I think it looks good as a homemade gun, and I think it makes sense as well. So shout out the pipe revolver. It's actually a pretty well designed gun in my books. That just about sums up my complaints for the weapon design in this game. I will have some good things to say about it later, but for now that just about sums up everything I have to say. My next critique has to do with character creation, or the level system. Basically, Fallout 4 decided to abandon skills and traits, aspects of character creation from the previous games, in favor of making a more perk focused character progression system. In my opinion, this is one of the worst aspects of Fallout 4. If Bethesda decided to not do this, I think that it genuinely would not have received the amount of hate and backlash Fallout 4 got. Basically, in the previous Fallout games, there were skills and perks, and in New Vegas, it even brought back traits. Skills were basically just aspects of the game that you could sink points into every time you leveled up. For example, you could put some points into guns or energy weapons to increase your efficiency with them, but you could also put points into things like lockpicking and hacking computer terminals. And you could also pick a perk on top of that. Fallout New Vegas even doubled down on this and added the traits, which were aspects that could completely change how you played the game that you'd pick immediately when creating your character. Fallout 4 basically just kind of combined all this into the perk system. This made character creation a lot less important and decreased the vast majority of the depth that went into creating a character in a Fallout game. If you couldn't tell already, this is what I believe is the worst aspect of Fallout 4. Fallout is meant to be an RPG with an extreme focus on character creation. By neutering the game of pretty much all character creation except for the perk system, really takes away from the RPG aspect that a lot of people like from Fallout. The only pro I can really see to the system is that it's extremely simple to understand, making everything a perk you just pick out. Sort of piggybacking off the player character here, choosing to have a voice protagonist is another bad aspect of this game. The problem with having a voice protagonist is that the dialogue options are heavily simplified, and this creates two issues. The first one being it creates a lack of player choice, which is a huge aspect of Fallout. Neutering this aspect of Fallout again is just not a good idea. The previous games gave you so much more different options when trying to handle various different dialogue options. There were speech checks very similar to Fallout 4's charisma checks, but there were also different aspects that could affect dialogue, like having a high intelligence or having a high amount of points in a specific skill. These checks in dialogue that got gutted in Fallout 4 gave the player so many different choices and options when completing different quests, and could completely change how a quest plays out. While this might not be a direct result of having a voice protagonist, I definitely think it had an effect on it. The second reason as to why I believe having a voice protagonist was not a good idea is that the options for dialogue are usually almost always shortened or summarized when compared to what the player character says. And I bet that almost everyone who's played the game has had one point where they picked a dialogue option thinking it meant something else, and then when the player character says it out loud, it was not what they were expecting at all. When you compare this to how New Vegas or even Fallout 3 handled dialogue, you would read out exactly what your characters say and then pick that option, and then the character you were talking to would respond accordingly. This was so much better of an option because you at least knew what you were saying when picking out a dialogue option. Now the dialogue options have been neutered to yes, no, sarcastic, or maybe, and then what comes out of your player character's mouth is not what you were expecting at all. This is also just incredibly unimmersive, as this character that is supposed to be pretty much what you make it to be now seemingly has a mind of its own. This also highlights a pretty big issue in Fallout 4, and that's that the characters are very predetermined no matter which one you choose. For example, Nate, one of the characters you can pick, is an army veteran, or if you pick Nora, you're a lawyer. Your character is a big family person having a husband or wife and a kid, which can really shift the player character's motivation before the game even starts. Compare this to New Vegas, where the only thing predetermined about your character is that they're a courier and that they traveled the lonesome road, causing the nuclear Armageddon of it if you played the DLC, and I guess that they got shot in the head. The only thing I guess that motivates the character that is somewhat predetermined is that Benny is the one who shot you in the head and you have to find him. But even then, you watch this happen. And plus, you don't even have to go after Benny depending on which ending of the game you choose. Fallout 4 predetermines so much about the character that it can be incredibly unimmersive. I think all this sort of culminates to show that character creation was not on the minds of the devs when creating this game. That just about sums up everything I had to say for character creation. Now it's time to talk about the second, probably worst thing to plague Fallout 4, and it's really bad writing. And in my opinion, this kind of sucks because I feel like the story really tries to at least sound like it has good writing, but I mean, it just really falls flat. Now, there's really only one reason why this game is called out for its bad writing, and it's that the Institute doesn't really have a goal. Like, they kidnap, murder, and replace people in the Commonwealth, and are this super like secretive faction that is like played up the entire like first 2 acts of the game until you get to them, but they don't have a goal. You could infer that they have a goal, but nothing is really explicitly stated. And this is a problem I think Bethesda has when making villains in their Fallout games. If you take a look to Fallout 3, the Enclave has this internal dispute where the AI president wants to basically just kill everybody and go to space, where the other half of the Enclave wants to take control of Project Purity so that they can give fresh water to the Capital Wasteland instead of the Brotherhood. Keep in mind, John Henry Eden also wants to take over Project Purity, but that's so he can infect the entire Capital Wasteland with FEV, effectively killing everyone or turning them into super mutants. But Colonel Autumn wants to take it over, but just to purify the water, I guess. I don't know. We have a similar dilemma in Fallout 4. The Institute wants to kidnap, kill, and replace people, but for really no reason. They don't have any goals or ambitions. They're just evil, but this just makes such a one-sided villain. They're just evil for the sake of being evil. This is such bad writing. The villain is not compelling whatsoever in this game. And there's some other instances of bad writing in this game too. Like, the Railroad keeps wanting to smuggle synths out of the Commonwealth, even after you destroy the Institute if you side with them. Another bad aspect of writing is why super mutants are even in the Commonwealth in the first place, especially in such large numbers. We know that the Institute is somewhat responsible for the super mutants because when they kidnapped and replaced people, they experimented on those people with FEV. And once those people turned into super mutants, they basically just kind of threw them to the surface and let them fend for themselves. How much of the people or how many super mutants they created isn't really explicitly said, which sort of adds to the vagueness. But also, we know that they stopped doing this because Virgil escapes the bioscience division, which essentially destroys it. It goes defunct. And by the time the game starts, this has already happened. So the bioscience division, or at least what should be the bioscience division, is completely abandoned, which means super mutants should not be replenished in the Commonwealth, yet they are. That just about sums up everything I had to say for the writing of the game. But yeah, these next set of critiques have to do with the factions. So I'm just gonna start off. The Railroad, in my opinion, is such a trash faction. I hate them so much. They would be great as a like side faction, but as a base faction, they are terrible. Their only goal is to rescue like synths from the Institute, which honestly, on paper, is actually a pretty compelling like motive. But in execution, it's horrible because the game made them a main faction, meaning they're one of the factions you can choose to completely end the game with. If you're trying to sort of, I guess, decide the fate of the Commonwealth, and you need to decide between the Railroad, Minutemen, Institute, or Brotherhood, the Railroad are by far the worst choice, maybe behind the Institute, depending on how you look at it, just because they don't have any ambitions for the Commonwealth. All they want to do is just rescue synths. They don't affect the main game in any way whatsoever. As maybe like a side faction, the Railroad would be great, honestly. But being a main faction that is meant to, I guess, influence the Commonwealth, they only save synths. They don't have any experience leading or, helping people in the Commonwealth. They're just there to help synths. My next critique is on the Minutemen. Now, the Minutemen are a good faction. They're probably my favorite faction in the whole game. I think, I don't know, but that doesn't mean they're not, or at least they don't have some flaws. And the first flaw that they have is their weapon. Their main weapon is the laser musket. Now, I have a lot of issues with this being their main weapon. For starters, it looks like it's just been gutted from a normal laser rifle or pistol and has become this far less effective gun. So I don't know why they bothered destroying so many laser weapons just to make a presumably worse one. My second issue with this gun comes from it being a crank weapon. My second critique is, why do you crank the gun? If it uses fusion cells, what's the point of cranking it? Because the fusion cells are a source of power. If the action of cranking it actually charged the laser, this would actually make for it to be a pretty compelling gun, and would actually make sense why the Minutemen would gut them into what they were, because when you crank them, it would generate the electricity to, I guess, charge it up. And I honestly think this might have been their intention originally, but maybe it just fell through, so they just made the crank use fusion cells. I don't know. But if the gun were to not use fusion cells and instead charge on the crank action, then I think that makes sense why they would gut these laser weapons into it. And then my second sort of critique with the Minutemen, aside from their weaponry, is that there's nothing like indicating their existence before you get there, aside from like the castle and like, I guess, Quincy, where they basically fell. The Minutemen are meant to be this group that was once there to, I guess, help the settlers, but then the events at Quincy caused them to, I guess, fall, and the Minutemen essentially disbanded. And this was another thing that happened, I guess, like right before the game started. And the Minutemen, in my opinion, there's nothing really indicating their existence, like I said, aside from the castle in Quincy before you showed up. This really just like makes you question the like validity, I guess, of the Minutemen. I personally just wish there was like a bit more to show, like, yeah, the Minutemen used to exist, but there just really isn't, aside from like Preston and like a few select locations. I mean, the Railroad, the secretive faction, probably has more points in the game that reference them than the Minutemen. But in my opinion, that critique is pretty nitpicky, and I don't think really matters that much. My final critique on the factions is the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, my main critique comes with the end of the game. And before I get to that, we have to understand what the Brotherhood's sort of goals are. And they basically just gatekeep and hoard technology in order to keep it from other people. Because in their mind, by doing this, they're preventing a potential nuclear war from not happening again. My problem with this arises with, at the end of the game, the Brotherhood nukes the Institute. Why would they do this? I get that Elder Maxson thinks that the synths are an abomination of man and should be destroyed, but there is so much other technology in the Institute that they are just completely leaving behind. The Institute is quite possibly the most advanced location in all of America, and the Brotherhood decides the best way to handle this is to completely nuke the whole location and all of the technology with it. You could make the argument that the Brotherhood needed to swiftly end the Institute is to ensure that they didn't lose the battle. But the Institute has access to teleportation. You cannot convince me in any world that the Brotherhood would not wanted to have seized the Institute instead of completely destroying it to get in on this technology for themselves. Like, that is the whole point of their faction, and they might have just discovered the most insane technology of all time, and you're telling me their first response is to just completely nuke it? Like, sure, nuke the synths if you think they're an abomination of man, whatever, but teleportation, they have teleportation. Basically, to sum it up, not nuking the Institute would have been much more reasonable of a choice from the Brotherhood. Now, in this section, I was actually going to talk about how I didn't like how the first half of the game was very linear in Fallout 4, meaning up until you build the signal interceptor for the Institute, you basically have to follow a very set path. But after saying the point out loud, I realized it was just something I didn't really agree with. Like, yeah, the first half of the story is linear, but this is not anything new in the Fallout series. And I'm not just talking about Fallout 3 being a fairly linear game. Even the original Fallouts, their main stories were linear to some extent. So instead, I'm just gonna skip to my critiques with the DLCs. When it comes to Fallout 4, the DLCs are incredibly mediocre, with the exception being Far Harbor, of course, and to a lesser degree Nuka World. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here is DLC or extended content for the Fallout franchise, basically referring to Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. The DLC featured in those games almost always featured some sort of content expansion, whether it be a new map or area to explore, new weapons. Really, there's only 2 DLCs that do this in Fallout 4. It's Nuka World and Far Harbor. In my opinion, Nuka World isn't that great of a DLC, at least like content wise. Like, the quest of Nuka World is not compelling at all. It's just you go to this raider camp and you can choose to kill them all, or you can be the leader of them and take over. Now, I will give this DLC one thing, and it's just kind of dumb fun. It gives you cool new areas to explore, and clearing the parks is kind of fun, and it is somewhat interesting to explore, so I'll give it that. But the quest is just not there at all, in my opinion. But I will give it where credit's due, and I do think it's a worthy DLC, bringing a good, reasonable expansion to the game. However, the other DLCs are where my gripes mainly lie with. The Automatron DLC is pretty trash, in my opinion, for a DLC. It adds basically just a side quest to the game, and just sort of expands upon what you can do with robots. There's no real like map expansion, and the content that it does bring in is minimal, like a few weapons and customizable robots. The quest itself just feels like a somewhat lengthy side quest. In my opinion, it's not that great of a DLC, considering almost all other DLCs in previous Fallout games, referring to Fallout 3 and New Vegas in particular, expanded the map or the content some sort of way. But it only gets worse from here. The Vault Tech DLC is terrible. Basically, it adds this giant indoor space where you can build a vault, and it slowly starts to like break your game. If you use or build or scrap anything in the vault, it slowly starts to break the nav mesh of the game. The nav mesh basically tells NPCs where they can walk, and I'm pretty sure like all interior locations share the same nav mesh or something like that. And basically, the vault is so big, it will just slowly start breaking it the more you use it. Not to mention, the content this DLC adds is extremely minimal. Just some things you can build in a vault, and like a side quest that takes maybe 10 minutes to complete. Now, I'm gonna segue this to the Wasteland Workshop and Contraptions DLC. They pretty much only add things you can build in settlements, and nothing content related to the game whatsoever. Now, this shouldn't be much of an issue because there's 4 other DLCs that aren't these 2. These 2 DLCs alone bring the total amount up to 6. The problem is that most of the other DLCs, with the exception of like Nuka World and Far Harbor, are pretty lackluster in my opinion. So having just 2 other DLCs that don't add anything whatsoever in terms of like content is just really like a slap in the face. And to clarify what I'm talking about, I'm basically just basing the content expansions that were offered by the other games. For example, Fallout 3 had Broken Steel, Point Lookout, The Pit, Mothership Zeta, and Operation Anchorage, which all in some way, shape, or form added new content or some new map to explore one way or another. Even Fallout New Vegas' DLCs, Old World Blues, Honest Hearts, Dead Money, and The Lonesome Road all added major amounts of content with whole entire new areas to explore. Compare this to Fallout 4's 2 DLCs that provide a new area to explore. That's where my gripes with these DLCs mainly come into play. They just add an insignificant amount of content. But honestly, I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think, because when doing some research for this, I've noticed online that a lot of people online actually seem to enjoy DLCs. Like, automatron. But then for some DLCs like the Vault-Tec Workshop, it's pretty widely agreed upon that it's pretty bad. And I also want to preface one more time that I think Nuka World and Far Harbor are both worthy DLCs, and I will be talking about them in the good parts of this video. So just please be aware of that. I'm really only critiquing the automatron, the contraptions, and Wasteland Workshop, along with the Vault-Tec Workshop in this. And I also included some very minor critiques I had with Nuka World. Not saying that it's a bad or unworthy DLC. I just want to clear that up so nobody gets confused here. So for this complaint, I'm just going to be combining 3 of them because they're pretty minor and I don't need to explain them a lot. So the first one, and as you can see in the gameplay, is trash on the settlement grounds. Building settlements is one of my favorite features in this game, but my biggest gripe is these little trash piles on the ground, and you can't place objects through them, so you have to either work around them or place stuff on top of them. And because they're so uneven, it usually doesn't look great if you place something on top of it. I wish they made it so you could scrap these stupid little trash piles. I don't know why they left them. There are mods to fix this, but most of them have been broken, at least for me, since the next gen update, and some of them can really mess with your game, like scrap everything. My next minor complaint is crits being VATS based. I don't use VATS. I absolutely despise it. I'm not really going to complain about VATS because it's more of an opinion thing, I guess. My complaint here is that they moved critical hits to being VATS only. Basically, as you use VATS, your critical bar will fill up, which basically lets you execute a critical. The game used to make critical shots sort of a luck-based thing, which made luck viable in combat. But now the system has been completely watered down to just being able to be used in VATS. I personally am not a fan of this. My next complaint here is that the Freedom Trail is incredibly confusing. You might think I sound dumb for this, just hear me out for a second. If you don't know what the Freedom Trail already is beforehand, like it is real, it's a real life thing, and I didn't going into this game when I first played it. Once you stumble across the Freedom Trail, it'll say, follow the Freedom Trail if you already have the miscellaneous quest, which is very likely because you have to visit Diamond City, and 9 times out of 10, one of the guards will mention like, you know the railroad? I hear you have to follow the Freedom Trail to find them, or a citizen of Diamond City, just someone will like yap and say it to you, which automatically gives you the little miscellaneous quest to follow the Freedom Trail. The issue with this is that you have to walk past the initial start of the Freedom Trail to find Nick Valentine. So 9 times out of 10, you won't be looking for the Freedom Trail, but accidentally come across it, and then it'll say to follow the Freedom Trail, and then you won't know where that is because the quest marker goes away because you weren't looking for it. And I hear some people saying, but it's a red trail on the ground, you can't miss it. When I played the game, I didn't even know what like to look for. At one point, I had just stumbled across it, but I didn't know when. I wish there was like a quest marker to each stage of the Freedom Trail, so to speak. And also the end of the Freedom Trail when you get into the Old North Church is also kind of stupid in my opinion. The password for the railroad's base is railroad. And the thing is like you're supposed to figure this out as you follow it because it'll tell you in the little like markers along the like Freedom Trail. But me personally, I didn't even take note of that. I just assumed it was railroad because that's what I was looking for, and it worked. Like first try. But I don't think it's that big of a deal. My main gripe here is that the Freedom Trail can just be confusing, especially if you already walked past it. Now, this is the last time I will complain in this video. I promise. It's gonna be all positive from here. But my last complaint, conveniently, is the ending of the game. Just like the intro, this ending is terrible. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I understand that Fallout 4 lets you play after the ending, unlike Fallout New Vegas and I guess Fallout 3 to an extent, but there's a big but here. The game after the ending really doesn't show how the factions affect the Commonwealth in any way. The only things that come to mind are whatever faction you pick will show up in Diamond City and just kind of walk around, and they'll also defend military checkpoints. You don't get to see how the faction you sided with influenced the game whatsoever. Now, the ending of Fallout 4, in my opinion, is laughably bad. It's like almost cringeworthy to listen to. I'm gonna take some points off immediately as the intro starts, as you are immediately reminded that your character is preconceived, but the intro is just like stupid. He just like yaps. I think about the life before the bombs, but now I live in a wasteland. Like, it's so bad. I hate it when games make your character like have emotion or think one way, when 9 times out of 10 you playing the game just have a completely different mindset. I mean, like, the ending, if anything, just is like a basic summarization of what you did throughout the game if you weren't paying attention to your own gameplay. So I mean, at least it does something. And then you just say some more cliche things. I know the road ahead will be hard, but you know, war never changes. But they do get a pass with the war never changes part here, because now that you've like played the game and you can see how that quote can kind of make sense. I actually do think the ending of Fallout 4 really exemplifies the war never changes pretty well, in my opinion. No matter which side you choose, you end up blowing up the Institute or Brotherhood of Steel one way or another. Just how people blew up the world with nuclear bombs beforehand. I think it has a good message and it makes sense here. So you know what? The war never changes gets a pass for this section. But my main gripe with the ending is it just doesn't explain like what happens after the game, and the game doesn't do a good job at showing you this either. Every Fallout game to come before this would end by describing the events that would take place, how your choices influenced the various people and factions you came across. This ending does basically none of that and just recaps what you've already played. So yeah, I think the ending's pretty trash for this game, just like the intro. But now we're moving to the good stuff. Now you're gonna see why I think this game is actually pretty good, but also bad but good. It's kind of like the whole point of this video. Now I'm gonna segue into what makes this game pretty good, in my opinion at least. And we're gonna start out with an obvious one, but it's the gameplay. I feel like the weapon feedback in this game is also really good. Not only do you get like a hit marker when you shoot something, but the enemy also will get like blood stains where you shoot them, and they'll stagger a bit depending on where you shoot them. It's all really good in my opinion, which is weird to me because I've seen people online compare Fallout 4's gameplay to like that of Half-Life 2. Not dissing Half-Life 2 or anything. I would love to make a video about that game, but this game's gunplay is definitely more evolved than Half-Life 2's for sure. I'm not gonna go out here and say it has like the gameplay of like Modern Warfare or Black Ops, but it's not bad by any means. This game also finally added a sprint function, which was much needed since the game's inception to 3D, and the sprint function is great. No complaints in that department. The worst aspect of gameplay is like physics is tied to FPS, and I'm pretty sure that's probably going to be fixed in the next Fallout game. It's already technically fixed with Fallout 76, but I know 100% it's going to be fixed by the next Fallout game, like single player one, because the Creation 2 engine finally fixed that, a problem that should have been fixed a long time ago. The weapon handling and animations, I guess, so to speak, are also pretty like fluid. They look nice, especially when comparing it to any Fallout that predates this one. The reload animations are pretty clean in my opinion. So props to the developers for that one, because honestly, in my opinion, they're really good. Settlement building is another aspect of this game that I actually think is a huge benefit to the series as a whole. Being able to build your own player home and structures is leagues better than what was available in the previous games, where you basically just had to go to a pre-made house made by someone else and set up shop there. I feel like this aspect really plays into like the RPG elements of this game really well, which is something that Fallout 4 actually lacks in. So honestly, I hope settlement building stays. It's one of my favorite aspects of the game, and it's done incredibly well. Even without mods, there's a lot of creativity to be had. It is good to know some glitches like the pillar glitch and like using rugs, but I mean, you don't need to know them. You can make some pretty cool structures. I just hope we get a lot more customization when it comes to the vanilla workshop in the next game, and it isn't locked behind some like paywall like the atomic shop in Fallout 76. If that happens, I think settlement building would be like in its prime. I was gonna segue into a different section for this, but honestly, I'm just gonna keep it in this one, and it's the crafting mechanics. They are really good in this game, much better than what was in Fallout New Vegas. There's pretty extensive weapon customization in this game, albeit a lot of the weapon mods just progressively get better until you either get the best full auto or the best semi-automatic like receiver or like and whatnot. Same thing with armor. You have a lot more customizations when it comes to that. Even making food, even though I don't think I've ever cooked food in this game, but there's a cooking station. And same thing with chems. I rarely ever make chems, if at all. I barely use chems in the first place. But the main aspects are the weapon and armor workbenches that allow for pretty extensive customization of items. All of this combined makes a really extensive but pretty easy to understand crafting system and easy to use, which I think is great. An aspect of this game that I really like is the Minutemen. They're the only faction in this game that I think is actually pretty good. I know I had my critiques with them before, but I still think they're good despite those. My favorite part about this faction is how lively it makes the world feel. The castle is actually a really cool base of operations, and because you're the quote-unquote general of the Minutemen, you actually use this to a fair degree. When you're at the castle, the Minutemen radio is playing non-stop, and while this might get annoying sometimes, it's kind of cool in my opinion because It lets you know what's going on in your world. If a settlement's getting attacked, the radio will let you know. If nothing's going on, the radio announcer will let you know nothing's going on right now. It makes the castle or the Minutemen HQ feel a lot more connected with the world, like it's aware of what's going on, which I think adds a whole nother level of immersion to the game. The radio itself really makes the game feel a lot more lively too. It lets you know of different things happening around the wasteland, and it covers things that are currently happening in the game, a current event that you can go and solve, I guess. It's not like Diamond City Radio where it covers something that happened that probably was at the hands of you. Not saying that Diamond City Radio is bad in any way. I think it's a great addition to the game. I'm just saying it's different and it adds a lot to the game. The Minutemen also seem pretty plausible. It's just really like a gang of farmers united to protect each other's farms from like raiders and super mutants and such. Like, I could totally see that happening in a real world setting. And to top this off, building at the castle is one of the more rewarding experiences in Fallout, at least when it comes to like building a settlement, because it actually feels like what you're building, it might have an impact on the world somehow. Like, you're building up the Minutemen. I think it was a great faction to pair along the settlement and crafting system. The Minutemen are probably the best faction in all of Fallout 4. I mean, that's not saying a lot because the other factions are pretty flawed even from like a writing standpoint. So it's not a difficult decision for me to say that the Minutemen are my favorite faction. But my main point is that the Minutemen are just generally a good faction and they do a lot to make the world feel alive. The next thing I want to talk about is Far Harbor and how I think it's just a good DLC. It's sort of like Point Lookout 2.0. I've seen a lot of people online say this. Point Lookout was a very similar DLC when it came to the sort of looks and aesthetic of Far Harbor in Fallout 3. The sort of misty and gloomy coastline. Even though it's a successor to a previously very similarly themed DLC, it's a great one. It explores the dynamics between synths really well, much more than the base game. It expands upon the Children of Adam and has a pretty good and pretty engaging story by all means. The DLC also has a lot of content, like even outside the main quest line. I honestly find myself doing other things in this DLC besides the main quests. All around, this is a very solid DLC, and I'm really just going to segue into my second part, and that's DLC weapons. The normal weapons, as I said earlier, for Fallout 4 kind of are trash, to say the least. Just in terms of their aesthetics, they don't really look too great. But then when it came to making DLC weapons, the developers locked in and created some of the most coolest weapons in Fallout. In Far Harbor, you have a lever action rifle, and I have no complaints other than the reload animation is pretty glitched, and ever since the next gen update, patches fixing it don't seem to fix it. Basically what I mean by it is, let's say you shot one bullet out of the gun, your player will load 5 in every time, even if it's just one bullet missing. Besides that minor flaw, I still think it's a cool gun and it holds up well. Additionally, Nuka World dropped a probably even better gun. They dropped the handmade rifle, which is just basically an AK style rifle that I presume was manufactured by the Raiders of Nuka World. Probably the best gun in the game, especially if you get like the problem solver variant of it, which is what I'm using. It shoots extremely fast, it guzzles through ammo, but is very fun to use and very satisfying as well. But yeah, in my opinion, Far Harbor is just a pretty cool DLC, and the weapons added from the main two DLCs are very solid weapons. The next aspect of this game that is unmatched, in my opinion, to any Fallout game is the world exploration. It's probably one of the best, if not the best aspect of this game. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. The locations in Fallout 4 all feel very unique. They feel very well crafted, and just in my opinion, they are the best in the series. Combine this with the fact of finding new power armors throughout the wasteland and finding new settlements that you can build at, all create probably one of the best world explorations in any Fallout game to date. The world exploration in this game is completely unmatched. Almost every location has something of value to offer or just something interesting to explore, and this is probably, in my opinion, the only Fallout game to achieve that. For example, Fallout New Vegas, as great as it is, it's probably my favorite Fallout game, but there's a lot of filler locations in that game. Now, this is partially intentional in Fallout New Vegas to have locations that are like purposely filler that really don't offer much other than their existence themselves. And I'm pretty sure this is to allow the player to fast travel to a location close to a faction that they might not have good standing with, so the faction isn't immediately hostile as you get towards them. At least that's what I've heard. I don't really know if there's truth to that, but it sounds like it'd work out to me. In Fallout 4, every location feels like there's something there, something like worth exploring for, a new area to find or some new loot. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just unmatched. I'm sure everyone who's played this game, no matter how skilled they are, has a part of the map that they haven't explored yet. Every playthrough of this game, I always find something new, and I've probably done like 5 to 10 playthroughs of this game, somewhere in that range. But yeah, I think Fallout 4 has the best world exploration out of any Fallout game, period. Another aspect I'd like to address for Fallout 4 is the city. Downtown Boston is the best adaptation of a city I have ever seen in a Fallout game. It is integrated so well into the environment. It's genuinely like impressive. I don't know what else to say. Fallout 3 had Washington DC as the big city, but it was completely ruined by the fact that you had to traverse through separate parts of the area through subway stations. This made traveling the city confusing and annoying, because now you had to go these specific routes if you wanted to get anywhere. Now, I will give New Vegas credit where it's due, and Freeside and the Las Vegas Strip is actually a pretty cool area. However, both these areas are their own load space, which isn't that big of a deal, but they're not in the overworld. You can't just walk into Freeside from the outside. That's what makes Boston and Fallout 4 so cool. You can just walk into it. There's no load spaces, and the city feels big. It feels populated. It's genuinely a really good adaptation of a city in a game. But yeah, Fallout 4 city is really detailed and really explorable in my opinion, which is a great aspect. The side missions in Fallout 4 also do not disappoint in my opinion. What I really like about the side quests is that they are all extremely different. They're their own sort of mini stories within themselves. For example, there's quests like the secret of the Cabot house, where you learn the secret of the Cabots, and it's a long line of quests where you ultimately discover what's going on behind closed doors at the Cabot house. That's one of my favorite quests in the game, because from the start you realize something's not right, or something's up at the very least. Or there's ones like Confidence Man, where you have to raise the confidence of the pretty scared Travis, who's the radio host. The side quests are great, and they're the reason I keep coming back to this game in the first place. And sort of piggybacking off of that, the companion quests are also really good. Now, I honestly didn't realize this, but there are only 4 companion quests in the game, but all 4 of them are really good quality in my opinion, and all worth sort of grinding a companion's affinity to achieve. In my opinion, the amazing world exploration combines very well with the amazing side quests that Fallout 4 has, which creates a very good experience in my opinion. Fallout 4's main quest is infamously not too great, but I honestly think the main appeal of this game is exploring the world and finding the new side quests it has to offer, because these are much more interesting in my opinion than the main quest will ever offer. The next thing I want to talk about is Nuka World, and I know I kind of dissed on it a little bit, but I still think it's a good DLC in the fact that it's only one of 2 DLCs that gives us any reasonable amount of content expansion in the game. It gets a plus for me. I think it's a good DLC because it's kind of just dumb fun. To kind of explain what I'm talking about, if you've ever played Black Ops 2 Zombies, there was a map called Buried. Now, this whole map was pretty stupid, but in a really fun way. The chances of getting good weapons from the mystery box were upped probably a lot, because I remember getting the ray gun all the time on this map and getting like the wonder weapon. If you don't know what that is, it's just like the best guns in the game. The game also had like a bank system where you could deposit as many points as you wanted, that you had at least, into the bank, and then the next time you played you could pull as many as you wanted out. So in round 1 you could get to the bank, pull out 10k, and then have the whole map opened up and all the guns you want instantly. And it doesn't help because the game starts you off with $1,500 because it has this chalk system where you can draw certain guns on the wall, and by drawing the guns on the wall you get points. So you could easily hit the mystery box up, or open your way up to the other chalk guns and put them on the wall to get even more points before you even take money out of the bank. My point is this map was stupidly broken, but that was the point of the map. It was meant to be stupidly broken, because there was some fun in that. The reason why I compare this to Nuka World is because Nuka World doesn't have that much of a quest. Just like Buried, it's kind of unserious. Pretty much all the main quests in Nuka World are just shooting things. If you side with the traders and decide that you want to free them from slavery, you shoot up all the raiders and you just shoot them. The whole quest line is just shooting stuff. And not to mention, this DLC dropped probably the most overpowered gun in the game, the handmade rifle. And this DLC is chock full to the brim with good loot. It has the best power armor in the game with the Quantum X01. You can get T51 sets. I was constantly finding full sets of X01 Mark III power armor because I played it when I was high level. They were just everywhere. All the power armor spawns just had crazy power armor in them. And I felt like I was just constantly finding fusion cores as well. There are so many fusion cores just scattered around as ground loot. What are normally pretty sought after items are just being handed to you. But I think a lot of this was intentional because it's the whole point of it is to just be stupidly broken. And that's where I think the fun of this DLC comes in. It's broken and that makes it fun. For example, there's 2 legendary handmade rifles that both have the same legendary effect. One is called the Problem Solver. I forget what the other one's called. So the gun will keep doing more damage the more you shoot something. And combine this with the already extremely fast fire rate of handmade rifles and you have an extremely broken gun. The only downside is that it eats so much ammo up. But if you're playing this late game, you definitely have the caps to spare. So combined with the fact that it adds the best weapon in the entire game and it gives you 2 opportunities to get this gun just in case you missed it the first time to make sure you get it, and combined with the plenty amount of enemies to kill and the top tier loot, this DLC is probably the most stupid fun DLC of all time. And that's why I think it kind of deserves credit. The main quest isn't that great, but it's not trying to be. So I think in that aspect, Nuka World is a pretty fun DLC. This is going to be the last thing I talk about, and in my opinion, it's one of the better choices made in Fallout 4, and it's power armor. And I think most people agree with me on this aspect. And every Fallout game before this, power armor was just a wearable piece of armor. You'd put it on like any other type of armor. Just go in the Pip-Boy and put it on. In this game, it made it a like giant suit you would actually have to get into, much more akin to the first game, which the power armor was a giant suit that you would wear. Although in the first game, power armor was still just an armor you would equip. Now, power armor, in my opinion, was executed almost perfectly in this game, which is actually impressive for how many things they've messed up. And I'm actually going to talk about why. It's pretty infamous that you get power armor at the very start of the game, and this is a part of Fallout that is constantly complained about. Now, this, hot take here, I don't think this was necessarily a bad thing. And the reason why is because power armor is a choice you make. Sure, it's overpowered, but there's a lot you have to keep in mind when using it. It's the only thing in the game that is damaged, so you'll need to repair it, and it breaks quickly. Furthermore, you need fusion cores to power it, and fusion cores infamously have a very short lifespan in this game. And they're pretty hard to obtain. They're pretty expensive, and you need to either find them in ammo boxes, which is extremely rare, or you'll need to find the generators and take them out of them, and there's only a limited supply of generators. If you get the Scrounger perk and don't use fusion cores that often, you will get a pretty large supply of them. On this playthrough, I probably have close to 200, and I have not purchased a single one. However, if you are using fusion cores and early game, they will be a lot more difficult to come by. And that's why I say power armor is a choice the players make. You get extreme protection benefits and no fall damage at the cost of having to repair it and constantly find fusion cores to keep using it. Now I'm going to segue into why I think it's a good thing you got power armor at the start of the game. For starters, the first fusion core you get in the Museum of Freedom is half charged, so you're barely going to be able to use it, and you're going to need to find a new fusion core soon if you want to keep using the armor. Now the reason why it's a good thing that it gives you the power armor immediately early on is because it teaches you things that you would not know if you would have gotten it later. For example, power armor needs to be repaired, and it's good to know how to do that early on so someone doesn't shy away from it later because they don't really want to repair it. It's good to let the player know that, hey, this needs to be repaired, but the benefits are really good. And also, it teaches you that those generators can have fusion cores in them. I'm 90% sure if we didn't know that starting out, we would literally walk past all those generators because they don't even look like a container. And again, it's not that imbalanced. Early on, you're going to need to find resources to repair it, and you're going to keep needing to find fusion cores to maintain it. And fusion cores are expensive, and getting caps early on can be hard. And you might not want to blow it all on fusion cores when you need ammo, medical supplies, and whatnot. I genuinely don't think it breaks the early game early on. I think it changes the early game, but I don't think it breaks it. Now, this quest definitely could have been handled better. I'll give them that. Handing the player a minigun with 1,000 bullets and spawning in a Deathclaw is kind of stupid in my opinion. It's really just a cool fight for the player to do with a semi-good weapon. I don't think they should have spawned a Deathclaw in. I mean, maybe they could have given you the minigun to clear out the rest of the raiders, but that's it. And I have seen people saying giving you a minigun early on breaks the game because it's a really good weapon early on. First of all, I'm gonna go with a not really on that. The minigun eats ammo, and you need ammo for it to be good. It has one of the lowest damages for any weapon in the entire game. So if you do end up using it and the DPS is really good early on, you'll run out of ammo quickly, and 5mm ammo is hard to come by, at least early on, because you're not going to be running into any other enemies with miniguns. And buying the ammo is also extremely expensive because you're going to have to buy a large number of it, which is naturally just going to be expensive. So most people probably will put the minigun away after they realize it kind of becomes useless once you use all the ammo for it. It's kind of like a get out of jail free card for like a few fights early on, but after that you got to put it away. It's not going to completely break the early game. To sum up everything I've just said, power armor is a choice in Fallout 4. You get a lot of benefits, but you have to acknowledge the downsides of wearing it, especially early on. Handing power armor to the player early on allows for them to experiment with the mechanic and know how it works going in for the rest of the game. If they gave you power armor later in the game, many players might not even want to use it because you need items to repair it, and you'll need to have gathered fusion cores. And if you didn't think to gather fusion cores early on, then it would kind of be obsolete. Giving the player power armor early on allows them to know, okay, I need to grab fusion cores and I'm gonna need to grab resources to repair it. It doesn't completely break the early game. Now, I will admit this, because you get power armor so early, if you're a returning player and know where to get fusion cores efficiently and fast, then yeah, it can seem a little imbalanced in that aspect because you're a returning player and you'll know where to get all these good fusion cores to use the armor. But my sort of rebuttal to that is, if you're a returning player, then you're gonna know how to get good things for everything. You could easily run to a power armor spawn, grab it, and then go to all the fusion core spawns and grab it. It adds like maybe an extra step that the returning player would have to do. Now that sums up pretty much everything for real this time. I think that power armor is a very well implemented system in this game. The Minutemen quest at the start where you get it could have been a lot better, I will admit that, but other than that, I think power armor is very well executed. All right, everyone, that just about sums up the entire video. This video is close to an hour long, and it took me a long time to make this, and I really appreciate it that you sat all the way through, or even if you skipped all the way through, I don't really care. I'm just glad you watched it. If you did end up enjoying this video, please consider dropping a like, and I would love it if you commented. I really want to know what other people's takes on this are, and a great way to let me know that is by using the comment section. And this video took a long time to make. I'm the only person who makes these videos, so I did all the editing, gathered all the footage for it and whatnot. So a sub, a like, anything would be great. I'd really appreciate it. Help the algorithm a bit. If there's anything I want to achieve from this video, it's to show that Fallout 4, albeit has a lot of flaws, it is a good game. I do think it is an enjoyable game. So with all that said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video, and that's about it. Bye.